Kia ora koutou, nau mai haere mai, and welcome to this webinar on the PDMF, Property Data Management Framework. I'm Duane Wilkins. I am a Geospatial Capability Advisor here at Land Information New Zealand, and I'm here with my colleague Michael Judd. And Mike is, let me get this right, Mike is our Senior Business Architect for Property Information, and he is our guru. He won't admit it, but he is our guru in terms of property data, certainly my guru anyway. So thanks, Mike, for joining us. Let's just, before we kick off, we'll just have a look what everybody is signed up for. I'll just share my screen for a moment. Okay, so understanding the PDMF, your top questions answered. So we're here with Michael Judd, and we're talking about the Property Data Management Framework. I'll say that a couple of times so we'll understand what a PDMF is. And so we're going to be having a look at the top questions. I know Mike has gone through and filtered out some of the top questions that he's asked in terms of the PDMF, and also any other questions that you might have along the way, feel free to put them into the chat. And if you're interested in asking a few questions of Mike at the end, then we can also invite you to the panel as well. So, Mike, do you want to just remind us, now we were supposed to do the readings, guilty, I didn't do the readings.
It's a big document.
Classic. I just saw it there and I thought, oh yeah, I was supposed to do that, wasn't I? Never mind, all good. So Mike, can you just remind us, what's the PDMF? Where does it come from? Maybe a little bit about the work you've been doing on it, because I know we've been working together in different parts of LINZ for the last 5-6 years. So if you could just remind us, for those of you who are just joining out of interest, what's the PDMF, where it's come from, what it's about, and then we'll get into those questions that you've got.
Thanks, Duane. So the Property Data Management Framework started life as a project of the Canterbury Spatial Data Infrastructure Program in response, of course, to the earthquakes in Canterbury in 2010 and 2011. It was one of the 8 projects selected for the Spatial Data Infrastructure Program that LINZ ran, and it was in response to property information not working very well in the response to the earthquake. We commissioned a problem identification report, which identified a whole bunch of problems with people being able to share and interoperate and use property data. Things like wrong buildings being demolished because addresses didn't identify the buildings well enough, problems with party walls and where they existed and where they didn't, problems with interoperability of data, different address data sets being used, not being able to be shared. So out of that came the idea that we needed a model that explained how all these different bits of property information connected together to describe all the information about one property would help avoid that situation happening again. If we all had a model that told us how we took data for a property that's stored in different data sets, like different organizations in different places, if we knew how to connect all that information up at a record level, so we could say all the information about this property you can find in a consistent manner, then that would be of enormous benefit and value to users, and particularly in incidences like earthquakes and flooding when they happen again. So that's the background to the program. There was an initial report released by East Spatial, who we contracted at the time, and that's available on our website, and we can share a link to that. Yep. And then since then the work came in-house. We expanded the remit beyond Canterbury to look at how we would solve the problem across all of New Zealand. And that, of course, has led us to where we are today with this discussion document of the Property Data Management Framework.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So do you want to share your screen so we can have a look at that document you've got there?
Okay, so this is the Property Data Management Framework. You can see it's
It's a beast.
It's a beast of a document. Yeah.
Used to be.
But it can be broken down into various bits, so you don't need to read it all. The focus of today's session is really the first couple of chapters where we outline our story about what a property is and how we got to deciding what a property is for the purposes of this framework. And that's really what the questions are about today. So shall I repeat? No, not quite.
Yeah. Actually, I had one thing we didn't mention yet. Is this is the first of two, isn't it? There's
yes, that's
a second
right.
one that I will go and find and share on the chat, and that's specifically understanding PDF for GIS practitioners.
That's
and
right.
that's where I'll be putting all the hard questions and the dumb questions from me.
There's no dumb questions.
To Mike about so how do I put this in my GIS? What do I need to know from my GIS? Because everything is GIS to me, even if it isn't. It is still GIS. So yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yep.
I've just found a link here, and I'm going to put this in the chat. So for those of you who haven't already registered, if you'd like to, that one's going to be on Thursday, the 4th of March, same time, same bat channel, and you're all welcome to come there. And also send through any questions beforehand as well. And
Sure.
we'll make sure we give those to Mike.
Yep.
Back to you. I've got some questions, I think.
Well, shall I start by getting into some of the top questions we were asked?
Absolutely.
So the top question I was asked was, what is this thing called a perspective? Why have you put this thing called a perspective into your model? The answer to that is around about 2017. So we'd been well underway developing the model, and then around about 2017, we got questioned about what a property was. How could we develop a property model when we didn't know what a property was and didn't have a definition for it? So we spent quite a bit of time and we ran a program here at LINZ to see if we could come up with a definition of a property. We interviewed a whole bunch of people around LINZ who worked in different areas of LINZ, and we asked them what property was. And what we found out was there is no one definition of a property, or what a property is depends to most people on what they're doing and the role that they were in. So when we asked surveyors, they would say that a property was a parcel. When we asked people who worked in the titles areas of LINZ, like property rights, they would say that a property was a title. And when we asked the Valuer General's office, they would say that a property was a rating unit. So we sort of looked into that a little bit more, and we found that they were all perfectly valid answers. To that person at that time doing that particular task or role, that view of a property was entirely valid. So our conclusion was there is no single definition of a property that will work all the time. That sort of got us thinking that, well, there has to be a way we can start describing this, because we need to be able to translate what a property is into digital data so we can use it in our systems. So we hit on this idea of a perspective, and basically all a perspective is, it's what somebody says a property is at the time that they are working with that property for what they are wanting to do at the time. Now, I don't know if I can I expand this?
Yeah, just thinking there's a little, maybe just try that one there, that button. What's that?
That's
there
better.
we go, that's better. Excellent.
So this particular chapter of the PDMF works through how we landed on what a perspective is and how we translate what a perspective is to pieces of digital data that we can actually work within our systems. So we build up this picture by starting by saying people make decisions about properties that reflects what they want to do, which is their perspective. And then we talk about what constraints there are on what a property can be in New Zealand. And then we slowly build the picture up based on what the perspectives are through to what the digital data is. There we go.
There we go, cool.
Sorry about that, guys.
All good.
So when we took this concept of perspectives, which is basically just what somebody says a property is, we realized that we had to be able to translate that into data. So effectively the way we worked it was we have these perspectives. So for instance, a very, very commonly used property data set is the district valuation roll data. That's really just a perspective on a property. So that's what councils use to value a property. So that's a valuation view of what a property is. Perfectly valid in that particular use case. And then we translate that through to basically what we're calling a unit of property, which is a property ID. And you can have different perspectives. For instance, we've got a couple up here that we had some conversations about. We know that there are about 3 different forms of a farm. There's an operational farm, a trading farm, and a legal farm, for example, that NPI talked to us about. There are many, many different perspectives of what a property is, and the important thing is they're all valid. What's crucial is that we understand what they are so we can turn it into a definition of a unit of property that then allows us to translate it into the digital data. So that was the first question, and I hope that's explained what a perspective is and how it fits into the model that we've got. And effectively, it's just what somebody wants to do with their land at the time. So another question I was asked was, what is the time frame or path to implement this model? If I scroll out, you can see the model is quite large. We don't think that in terms of implementing the whole model, the model's not really designed to be implemented as a whole thing. A lot of what we put in this model was because we needed to understand how property was and what supported the creation of that property. So for instance, if we look over on this side of the model over here, we've got a lot of information about private leases and rental agreements and things like that. Well, they're probably never going to be available to us to turn into digital data and implement per se. But we needed to have it in the model so we could understand how those private leases contributed to what a property is. So the take-home message is we don't expect that the model will be implemented in its entirety, and particularly not all at once. What we do think is that agencies, people will pick off particular parts of the model that are valid and relevant to them and work to implement those particular pieces. So if you work with addresses a lot, you might look at how you can connect addresses into a unit of property. And work on that particular piece, if that piece is of most importance to you. Or you might find that you're more interested in understanding and implementing how titled land, say a record of title from LINZ, aggregates together. Say we have a property which is 2 or 3 titles. How do we bring those together into a unit of property, say for valuation? So we think the way the model will be implemented is by people looking at the bits that are of interest to them, and as they renew their systems or find a problem that they need to solve, use this model to implement particular relationships, because this is in effect a relationship model. It's not a model that shows you data sets, it's a model that shows you the relationships between records and data sets.
Mike, when you mentioned addressing, I thought it would be useful just to mention for those watching that we have got a addressing webinar.
Yes, that's right, we do.
In a few weeks, and also a property data webinar as well. So that's kind of separate to PDMF, but just looking at what data is there and how you use those particular data sets and understanding them. And we've had lots of discussions in the past about sending a drone to a house. Where does that drone going to deliver its pizza? At the front door, the letterbox, the 5 meters in from the thing. So we'll talk about that stuff as well. So that's in terms of addressing property data.
Yep. That of course links into this thing over here in the model, which is called connection, which is effectively an access point. But that's a whole other story that we're not planning on getting into today.
Okay. I'll stop interrupting.
Yeah. In terms of timelines for implementing this, what LINZ is doing at the moment, so LINZ is committed to a program of work to start implementing this particular relationship here. So we're working to connect valuation references, which is the primary key inside a rating unit, and to titles. So we're working in this valuation perspective, which means our unit of property is going to be a val ref, and we're working to connect that through to titles. So that's work that LINZ is progressing with now, and that's our commitment at the moment, is to work on this particular relationship. We are looking ahead to further relationships that we'll be looking to implement, probably in the address to property space and the building to property space. The valuation one, we're hoping to have made quite significant progress on that by the end of this year. We're currently already working with territorial authorities to get access and share the rating valuation data so we can build this and deliver it. In terms of other agencies, the constraints, of course, are the systems that people use and what the refresh rate on those systems are. So, what we'd like to see is when those systems come up for renewal or when problems occur, people use this model to start looking at the relationships and implementing them into their systems. So the timeline's pretty flexible, really. What the model is really about at this stage is getting a shared understanding, and then picking it up after that, piece by piece.
Cool.
So they were the two top questions. Third question, and this was one that I found interesting. I was asked, is there an opportunity to consider an extension to the model for polygon overlays? So what people are talking about here is planning zones, or things like mesh block zones, or other pieces of data that are related to a property. And the answer to that is yes, in short. We designed the PDMF model around a pretty limited core set of information. And if I just flick back to the PDMF document, we had to limit our scope, and we limited our scope sorry, that one there. We limited our scope by looking at what the core information was for a property is. And here is what we consider the core bits of information for a property to be: land, some permission to use that land, the ability to build buildings on it and improve it, the ability to get services on and off it, and the ability to share the location of that, which would be an address. But we do recognise that a lot of the value that people want to get from property information sits around these things, like in building consents or school zones or things like that. So we designed the model to be extensible. We think that any of those other things can be connected into the model through one of these 5 core elements. So if you're interested in a school zone, you would connect into the model through the property boundary, so the unit of property element. And if I go back to my model, but I've lost my controls again.
You just try pressing escape once more. Just a couple
there
of
we
times.
go. Yeah. So if I come back to the model, we think extending the model is a case of identifying the appropriate place to hook into the model. So if it's, say, a school zone, you'd probably hook into the model at a unit of property level. I did get some interesting use cases from a person who asked me about water.
Can I just jump in just before
sure.
you do on that one, Michael? Question here from Simon Allen. Is there a possibility that LINZ would distribute land value as part of this val-ref parcel relationship? It's in relation to slightly earlier.
So the district valuation roll data include that is data sets that is a data set that's used for the valuation of property for rating purposes. It includes the land value and capital value attributes. So when that data set that can be made available to the public, then that will be involved part of it. At this stage, our plan is to make it available to central and local government,
Cool.
And that's mainly because we don't own that data set. We're driven by the territorial authorities that do own that data set.
Just while we're on the topic, question here from Gerard Logan. Is it the intention for LINZ to hold current/updated DVR data, including LV/capital value plus sales data?
So the current intent is that we will build what we're calling a national DVR data set. We won't own that data. The data, of course, will stay with the councils. They are the owner of district valuation roll data. What we're doing is we are getting an agreement to use that data to compile it into a national data set, and at this stage make it available for central and local government use, because that was the level of comfort that we were able to determine with the territorial authorities who are the owners of that data.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. So, sorry, you were coming back to your water example?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. So we were talking about extensions to the model. As I say, most people want to, the value of property data is often in things like consents, or in knowing where a school zone is, or in this case, where water facilities were. So what I did here was I mocked up, in response to the question I received, how you could, for example, include into the model a water tank. So a water tank maybe would sit onto a unit of property. Another example was water pipes and horizontal infrastructure, which is, a fairly topical discussion point in Wellington at the moment anyway. And here's an example of how possibly you would extend the PDMF model into that horizontal infrastructure through an access point, which would usually be something like a water meter, for example, and then that water meter would connect to your pipe network. Couple of examples about how we think the PDMF would be extensible, but our work so far indicates that it is extensible. It just depends where you hook into this model. So the last question I had lined up was, I was asked a question about, and we've probably touched on this a bit with the DVR data, how would the data be kept current, and is this even possible? So the answer to that is the PDMF is not a model about data sets. It's a model about how we connect individual records of data together to form a package of information about a property. So when you see something in here that says address or record of title, we're not talking about the data set. We're talking about the individual records in that data set that we link together to form a package of data about a property. There's no intent at this stage for all of this data to be put into one big warehouse and be maintained centrally. The idea here is that it's a relationship model. The data stays with its owners. It's maintained under the current processes that those owners and agencies have in place. And what gets exposed is what we maintain is the relationships between the data. And now we think that's quite achievable. And we're already starting, as I say, we're already starting to build that link between a rating unit and a title. So it's not so much a question about maintaining the data sets. They will stay where they are and be maintained by who currently does. It's a question of maintaining the relationships between them, which of course brings us into needing good life cycling information on that data as well. But we've started with the ValRef to title, and we'll be moving on from there. They were the main questions that people asked me. I've got two short questions that were asked us to answer. One was somebody said the model looks a bit light on detail, and this was somebody who was particularly interested in Maori land, which sits down here in our model. And the question was, they were interested in Maori land and they felt that the model was a little bit light, and the answer, of course, to that is yes, that is the case. There's not much content in this model about Maori land, but during the work to develop the model, we identified that Maori land was part of the property picture. So we needed to have at least a placeholder for that so that it could be developed further in the future. And pretty much the same would apply to state land as well. It's in here as a placeholder, but I would not say that we have completed the modelling to fully understand how that works. And the other question I was asked, which I think is a great idea, is could there be a library of templates and examples for us to access? And the answer to that is I think that's a fantastic idea. We do have some examples in the document. Now they're further down the document, so not within the first few chapters. But we only picked a couple of the very popular examples that we were aware of. So we picked a straightforward residential property, a more complex residential property, things like that. But I think a library of templates and examples is a great idea. I'll look at making some more of those, particularly if people give me specific examples. But if anybody else wants to contribute to that, then all help gratefully received.
Could you zoom in on that one a little, Mike?
Sure.
Or just
sorry.
On the plus over there. And keep it in there. Yeah.
Here we go.
That's like it.
So this is an example of what a very straightforward property would look like if we use the PDMF to model that property. So this is the instance, the instance where we only have one of everything. So there's one parcel, one title, one rating unit, one address. We know, of course, that there are many other sorts of property that get more difficult, for instance, where you have several parcels and several titles and several buildings. So anything we can do to show people or show how the PDMF model works in reality, and also get some explanatory material out so that people who are not necessarily experts at either modelling or understanding property can see it and the benefit to them, I think that's a great idea.
Question here for you, Mike, from Zoe Tate. In regards to Māori land, would the perspective remain the same or take a different lens, and what connections/relationships do you anticipate to have under that tenure?
That's a really good question. So we've put Māori land down here and Māori freehold land as part of what we're calling tenure. And we think the connection comes up through a unit of property. We haven't done any work to identify a Māori land perspective and how that would relate to the legal constructs of Māori land. That would be a really interesting piece of work to do. My guess would be we would have some sort of perspective that sits up here. We would then define a unit of property around against some definition of what Māori land is, and then we would then work through these connections to probably Māori land online, which is where I think most of that information is stored. It's a really good question.
Thanks, Mike. So we've got another question here from Tim Farrier. Is there any linkage between this piece of work and the STEP project?
Yes, there is, although somewhat indirectly. STEP, of course, if you can see that, STEP is our property.
Zoom in a bit more.
How about that?
Yeah, that's better.
So STEP is our property rights system, and it mainly works in the record of title and freehold land, leasehold land, unit of title. Unit title space. So it's all about property rights, the surveyed piece of land, and then the title, which is the rights that go with it, the rights, responsibilities and restrictions. And this is pretty much where Land Online will continue to play. And that, of course, is the STEP program. The indirect link is that one of the new services being delivered out of the rebuild of Land Online is called the Notice of Change of Ownership and Occupation service, which is an automated notification to a council when a property gets sold or transacted, to tell the council that the property has been sold or transacted, which is a legal requirement. TAs require that to be delivered with a link to valuation reference, to rating unit data, to rating unit, ValRef. So the way that we are delivering that notice of service is we're using this PDMF model as the blueprint for which we are going to be connecting rating unit to titles and therefore through to parcels to deliver that link so we can deliver the notice service. So it's an indirect link because this model is not about modelling Land Online, it's about modelling connections from Land Online to other bits of data. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that does. I think, well, answered it for me anyway. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes. Yep, Tim's saying yes, thanks. Cool. If you've got any other questions, feel free to put them into the chat there and we can provide them to Mike. But just letting you know that this is being recorded, and what we'll do is provide a condensed version online with captions. Captions can take us a little time, so it won't be in the next couple of days, probably be the next week or two that'll be available. But you're also invited to join us for the session on the 4th of March, I think it was, for the specifically for GIS practitioners, where we'll be asking a different set of questions. And I think pretty sure in the registration form there's an option there to add questions when people register. But yeah, I'll just give it a moment there. If anybody has got some last questions there, happy to take them. But yeah, thanks, Mike. I know that a lot of work has gone into this over a number of years. Question here from Gerard Logan. With Crown Land, is there a move to set up a Crown register to capture the agency responsible for management?
Yeah, so currently in LINZ at the moment, there's a program called CROSL, the Central Record of State Land. And that program is looking at what we do around filling in those data gaps and providing more information about state land and who administers it.
I'll just share the screen and.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
No, you're good.
Yeah.
I'll just swipe it.
Yeah, it is a good question and a known issue. The modelling we did in the PDMF suggested that we really need to be creating what we're calling a record of state land, which is something that's essentially equivalent to a title to hold the administrator and other, rights, responsibilities, restrictions type information where it applies to state land. But the program in LINZ that's dealing with that is the Central Record of State Land program, and Duane is showing you the online mapping system that they've put together so far, which has collated the information that they've been able to get from government departments to date. And that, of course, becomes an input into that becomes an input into creating a property in a PDMF sort of model sense.
Cool. Let's see if I can find something there we go. Have a look down Hamilton City. Just some non-doc data and a couple of other examples.
Yep, you find most of it's from the Department of Conservation. There'll be some Ministry of Education stuff in there.
CC one there.
Yep.
Doc one there. Yep. It's pretty easy to use, investigate. And for those of you who are GIS users, of course, you'll be able to access the REST service as well through the back end and add that straight into your own maps.
Yep. But I certainly feel your pain if you've had to go hunting through Gazette notices and statutory actions to try and find who the current administrator of a piece of land is. It's a very, very time-consuming task.
So there's just in relation to Gerard's question, Crown Register to capture the agents responsible for management. So what I appear to be looking at could fit that criteria. I'm looking at responsible agency, filtered by management agency. Hopefully that provides, let me see if I can, let's use, where's Hamilton? There we go, apply. So what I've just done is just filtered based on Hamilton City Council, I think. No, maybe not. Well, I attempted to anyway. I gave it a fair go. I clicked the buttons.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's available there, and I'll put that link in the chat for you as well, so you can have a fiddle in there. Well, I think that's probably us for today, Mike. Are you happy for us to share your email?
Yes, absolutely. We're very happy to answer any questions people have. Please get in touch. Yeah.
Oh, Greg asks, when do you deliver the coffee?
I'm not.
Greg Bennett.
I would have to figure out which relationship to a property I would need to form in order to link the coffee cup to the kitchen, maybe.
Decaf soy mocha latte with an extra shot. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks again, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining us. That is us for today.